Welcome to this second episode in the dialogue episodes commenting on the theory of science episode series in our podcast. And I have with me Andrew Tolley, and I'm really excited that you want to spend time on this and that you actually, as far as I have understood several times now, you are both excited about the subject and really have things that you also want to say on weird things like this. So thank you so much. And first of all, I've known who you are for, I don't know, at least 15 years or something like that. And I don't know if my audience does. So I'd like you to tell us about your background in general and how you met coffee and how coffee became your career path.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. I think when you first asked me, I don't think you actually even finished the question, will you go on my podcast, before I'd said yes.
No, that's true.
So it's I think you were shocked or taken aback by how quickly I responded yes. No, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, I thought I had to convince you for a long time, but that was a very easy one.
Maybe I missed an opportunity, I don't know. But yeah, no, we have known each other for a long time. I think we first met at London School of Coffee. Probably that long ago, maybe. Yeah. So I
think it was on a rooftop at a party at the Thames because it was at a Macanta party many years ago.
Okay.
Even before London School of Coffee. But I was there as part of London School of Coffee.
Yeah. I certainly I think I did your roasting foundation course, because I was also training at London School of Coffee doing like barista skills and latte art and things. And I did your roasting foundation course, and which was good fun, a good introduction to roasting back then. This was 2008 or 9 or 10 or something. So everything's changed a lot since then. But yeah, my journey in coffee, it depends on how far back you want to go. I started a company with my brother and sister back in London in 2006 called Taylor Street Baristas, and that was a cafe business, multi-site cafe business that became a roasting wholesale business as well. And we grew that to about 12 sites or something. We had them across London, and then we had another one in New York. But my history in sort of goes back to hospitality in Australia. So from Australia, grew up near Canberra, and then a little bit in Sydney, and then overseas as well. But a lot of my working life was spent in restaurants and hotels and some bars before moving specifically into coffee, and that was while I was studying at university. So I was always sort of marrying the hospitality background with the I guess the intellectual background through university studies. And
what did you study?
Yeah, so what I studied was nothing to do with coffee, like with a lot of people. So I did actually did a couple of years of what in Australia we call the arts. So it was philosophy, psychology, political science, anthropology, those sort of subjects. And I thought I wanted to get into psychology and work in that professionally. But then I realized that I probably didn't, and also that I wasn't going to find work as a result of doing that arts degree. So I then shifted tack completely, and I moved into environmental science. Majoring in environmental biology, and so that is subjects like plant physiology, biology, chemistry, all sorts of the sciences, basically, as you can imagine. So organic and non-organic chemistry, and then I combined that with a business degree, and the business degree majored in finance, but it obviously covered accounting and all the core concepts of business. And the idea was that I would graduate from that and then start working as an environmental consultant. And I finished that degree and moved to London for a 6-week holiday. And then I never left. So I'd kind of finished university, and that sort of ended my actual ties with needing to be in Sydney. So I came to England for a holiday, and about 3 months after I decided to stay, my brother and I were thinking we'd rather kind of work for ourselves rather than find ourselves working for someone else. So the idea for Taylor Street was born, and we called up our sister back in Australia, and we asked her to come over and help us out. And so that was the birth.
It's really an interesting and I guess not that common way of going about it. That's starting a family business like that. So
yeah.
But just this is a complete podcast in itself, I guess. But how did you what org chart did you have for the three of you? Did you have different roles? And
yeah, good question. So it's, we're, I guess, quite lucky because A, we got on really well, but B, we had very well delineated roles. So Nick focused on the business side, the development. He was the CEO. My sister Laura, she was focused on the design and brand, and did a lot of the like interior design. So every cafe we built was designed by her, and she managed the projects as well. And then my role was specifically in the coffee. So that's why I'm here today, I guess, to discuss coffee. So what we realized very quickly is that coffee is all about people, and it's providing great service. That's my hospitality background, and we all have that. But also it's instilling a passion for coffee in the baristas. And so that requires a lot of training. So we would take people with zero skills, and we would train them as much as we possibly could on everything from barista skills, sensory, so that they, and customer service, obviously, so they could understand how to make, serve, and make and serve a great coffee, and then also deliver a great experience. And so this was 2006. This was before the boom of specialty coffee in London. And then so we were kind of quite lucky to be riding that wave. And coming from Australia, we know it was where the cafes were huge already, and there were, it was really a common part of your life. And then you get to London, and there was literally, like, as everyone's heard of, Monmouth, and then Flat White opened. So really, that was a huge opportunity for great coffee in London, and so that was the wave we were riding, and it really started to boom 2008, 2009, 2010, and I think it was around 2007 or 2008 that I started teaching at London School of Coffee. I think I was brought in by Ben Townsend, who you also know quite well. Sort of exposed more to the training side of things, so the wider world of coffee, I guess.
do you remember your the cup of coffee you had where you just thought, this is amazing? And it's not just because most people who doesn't have parents in the specialty coffee business, and there's not a lot of that, I guess, don't consider coffee coffee is just coffee. But there's a cup of coffee where that just that light bulb goes off. Do you remember that cup of coffee?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's I think the good thing about coffee is that it those light bulbs keep on coming, right? So you as you get exposed to more and more different kinds of coffee, and those you sort of eventually have those. If you're in coffee for long enough, I think you have those coffee experiences every, 6, 12, 18, 24 months or whatever. But the first one for sure was a Flat White. I was walking down Oxford Street in Sydney, and that sort of, hate to use the terms after having listened to your podcast, but that harmonious balance, for whatever balance means, but the harmonious balance of like really creamy milk and a sort of toffee-like coffee underlying that, and then the integration, the espresso integrated with the texture of the milk. That was the the coffee that made me look twice at the coffee was like a moment of reflection, you know.
It's
And
funny,
I'd always
isn't
been
it?
into flavor and food, and was more into wine and great food, and was doing a lot of cooking at the time. I was working in restaurants, but this was definitely an eye-opening moment that would always catch me. And then I went back there every single day, because I'd always get a coffee on the way to uni and then have another coffee at uni, so to keep me going.
What is the biggest frustration that you've, having then decided to kind of choose coffee as a career? What is it that you felt has been missing most, or what is it that you think the community doesn't have that has been a frustration for you trying to kind of, not trying, but having a career in coffee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's funny with coffee. I think you know, when we first started, there was not a lot of knowledge, right? So there were rumors and basic concepts of this is how you do it, and you're chasing some kind of elusive God shot, and you didn't actually know what you were doing. I mean, you could follow the basic steps of, you know, put the coffee in the basket and you know, distribute and tap and insert immediately, brew it straight away, make sure you flush the group head every single time. But there's really you know, it was more so in the past, but I think it continues to stay this sort of mystery about what are we actually doing in order to achieve an objective, and what is that actual objective, right? So how we're looking to achieve a very good coffee in the cup every single time, but we don't necessarily communicate exactly what that is in terms of being a good coffee. Like, who is that coffee actually for? Is that person going to enjoy the coffee, or are we making that coffee for ourselves? So you know, I think there's huge opportunities in coffee still to really define those objectives clearly, and also you know, we can reduce the stress level for baristas, because I think with science, we know there are certain things we know, and there are also many things we don't know. And I think sometimes we're not very good at communicating to people who we're training what we don't know, because if they knew that achieving an outstanding, you know, in the language of a barista championship, you know, a six coffee, an outstanding coffee, if we knew that achieving a 6 coffee was actually just impossible every single time, you might get one in, say, 200, then it might save the baristas a lot of stress, a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also coupling the whole consumer, that you need to kind of study the judges or be able to predict what they like or not like, even though they are trying to kind of score it, what they call it objectively. There's an element of preference, right? So that also bridging that, getting the certainty and reducing the stress level by knowing your objectives, by collecting data about preferences, about the people you're trying to serve, right? That would make it a known objective.
Yeah. Coffee competitions. I did a bit of judging. I judged the UK BCs for many years. I was a head judge in that, and then also did sensory judging in the World Barista Championships and World Brewers Cup. And yeah, so that experience is really, really fascinating. You know, we're asked as judges to you know, objectively score things and score them based on the rules. But again, there are times when, you know, we're trained a lot on this, or we're calibrated a lot on the sensory side of judging or evaluating coffee. And then we've got to have this knowledge about coffee as well. So, you know, from our own reading, but there's the knowledge test can be quite simple. And every year you get baristas who are pushing boundaries around, you know, the coffees that they're sourcing, the processing methods, and so on. And so what can happen sometimes is you can get these situations where a barista might tell you something like, you know, this coffee was specially processed. We've got these citric fruits. They were put into a barrel with the coffee, and it's lowered the pH, and therefore it's increased the the citric acid quality of this coffee, and you're going to taste a bit more sort of oranges and lemons. And like, when you first hear this as a judge, you're like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I don't know if it's true. I'm not an expert in sort of fermentation, but do I reward this barista for professionalism? Because professionalism is based on knowledge. You're sort of evaluating a barista on their knowledge, but also their skill set, and you're also evaluating them based on whether what they say in a coffee is actually matching up with your experience in the cup. So there's sort of all these different things tie together, and that's where you get this sort of holistic score and this assessment of whether the barista is the best in the world and is going to be an ambassador for specialty coffee. But there is a good amount of it which is relatively subjective and relatively preference based, and then you bring in judges from all over the world with different experiences, different sensory experiences for one thing, and you're asking them to be calibrated on flavors. So one person's orange is rarely another person's orange, and especially when you start giving flavor notes like kumquat and all these other things. So it's a difficult one.
I've been thinking about the roasting competition, because as a scientist, you don't like random decisions, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where I've never really felt very attracted to the competitions. I do acknowledge that people people are extremely skilled, and they learn so much preparing to the competition. So it's the best people in the world, obviously, because they decide to spend so much time doing it, and they are good already. But the outcome of the I think there's a big random aspect of it, and which is fair enough. That's also with football, who's the best team in the world. So in a sense, we've kind of got used to sports having a random element that we accept because it makes it more interesting, right? Yeah. But talking about the best barista, we are really trying to rank people, who is the best and who is second best and third best. That looks like a scientific ranking, right? But it isn't. And that's one of the things that has annoyed me with the competitions, that at least I would say, I don't know, but perhaps the top 4 or 5, if you did the competition the next day, it would have been, and that's not because number 5 has become better. It's just because when you throw a dice, you get a different result every time.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, of course, competitions is not a scientific project, and it shouldn't be. So I'm not saying I think they are bad. I'm just saying, as a scientist, you are a bit annoyed with the randomness of it, because there's a lot of stake, right? So I've been thinking about, if you should do a fair and relevant roasting competition, then it should span, I don't know, 3-4 days, and then you should have an audience of 100 people or something like that. And then on the first day, you are your task is to expose, what's it called, that to map out the preferences of the audience. So you can choose whatever terroir, whatever roast, you can do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And then you have an opportunity to map out the preferences of this specific audience. And then you go back with those data, and then you create your products, and then you serve it for the same audience. And then the roast master who is able to best please that audience is the winner, because this is fair. Everybody had, and this is actually exactly what you should be good at as a roast master when you open your own business. Mm-hmm. I choose a customer segment. My job is to expose the preferences they have and please them. And I'm not saying that you should just be a crowd pleaser as a roaster. You can have your own vision that's different from your audience, but you should have both. And most people only have their own preferences, and they don't care about the audiences, right? So that's always what we try to teach our clients, that you need to decide a consumer segment, and you need to map out their preferences, because even if you don't want to give them just what they want, you need to kind of strategically know where you put your product, so that you get your business objective down the line. So I think this could be, I don't know how it probably wouldn't work logistically, and it might be a bad idea for a lot of reasons, but the scientist in me like the idea of, this is fair and it's relevant. So that could be fun. I don't know if that was just an idea I've had to make the competition more fair and fun.
Yeah, I think the other thing about competitions is the experience. So, you know, I mean, you could never, I don't think anyone working in the competitions is ever saying that the barista championships are entertaining to watch. You know, very, very few people. It's not really an audience sport. It's very much an insider sport. So
You mean the barista?
Yeah.
It's but then think about the roasting. My good friend Michael de Renoir, he says that roasting championship is as exciting as seeing painting drying.
Yes. Yeah. He works with Loring, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's true. I don't know who would sit there and watch it. It's not. It's probably more boring than golf. I don't know if you like golf, but
No, I don't.
But yeah, so it's funny with these competitions and everything, because you are you know, you're using them to move people forward, to drive, you know, innovation in the industry, to look for trends. They're definitely the pointy end of the coffee world, and they're influencing what farmers are producing in terms of coffee and how they're processing it. And I think you'd struggle to argue that against them being driving developments at farm level even.
So sure. Yeah.
It's really impressive. But at the same time, is it bringing more consumers into coffee? Is it bringing more people into the coffee world who would, as a result, end up drinking more great coffee? Is it actually working on that skill set as you're talking about of helping coffee professionals, whether they're roasters or cafe owners or baristas, to really fine tune their product so it is something that actually the customer wants to drink? Because fundamentally, that is how you're going to get more people into the world of, you know, higher quality coffee with better provenance and ethics behind it. So, so these are all good questions to ask and find solutions for. But also, I think there's this other question you're saying around, sorry to cut you off, but around innovation and then business. So on the one hand, you know, it's people get into business because they're excited about the creativity. They want to innovate. They want to deliver something new. But at the same time, they need to run a business which is profitable, where they actually have a product that people want to buy. And so you've got to find that sort of happy medium of being able to introduce something new, but also do it in a way which is appealing to the customer.
Yeah, and I have this approach that I think the reason why it's a good idea to be strategic about who you want to serve is that then you can kind of work methodology with a method around it. So typically people have a preference that is different from most the kind of the masses, right? Which is great. I'm not but I think both things are needed. So you could, let's say that you have preference for typically very light roast and fruity coffees, and most people in your area has preferences for chocolatey darker roasts. Then I think people think, okay, should I sell my soul to the devil and roast dark, or should I stick with my vision and my values? But I think a middle ground is much better, where if you consider, okay, you have your own Rolls Royces of coffees, but then you should also have some educational products. You could also call it transitional. People can't take a huge jump. They need to take small steps. Right. And then I think if you roast something it has to be less expensive and darker in this scenario, and then you can establish a relationship. But by knowing where they are, you can be close to where they are, and then just be a hint away. So there's also an element of novelty, and then you can make money convincing people about your vision over the next 5 years, and having great relationships and make money while you do it without sacrificing your values and your own personal preferences. Your own personal preferences is kind of the light tower for everybody. And then you use your skills as a roast master to map out, and this is where it would be interesting in the roasting competition. Okay, map out these people. You need to make something that they like, regardless of if it's far or close to what you like. And then use your skills to create something, these small steps for them, and then you can drag people to your vision. but not if you if it's too expensive and they don't like it. You'll never create a relationship, and you'll never teach people. I'm just saying this because people often feel is either you sell your soul to the devil or you stick with your values. But I think it's much more interesting to have this broader kind of approach, because people just struggle too much if they are not, if they think this binary, it's me or them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but it's just, Andrew, I just wanted to make sure that, so you, we talked about that we met in London and that you created Taylor Street's Baristas, which is an amazing, I'm really fascinated. I always loved coming there. It was just great atmosphere, amazing coffee, it was very fast paced. It was really amazing atmosphere for the audience who hasn't been there. So I was really impressed with that work. But then you sold the business and now you are working. So
Yeah.
let's just
Continue the
to
story.
make
Yeah.
sure
So
people get the full
I
picture.
think we stopped back in 2010 or so. So yeah, a few things happened after that. We got out of Taylor Street in 2019, so I was there for a few more years. Also started another business called Harrison Hall, which was another multi-site specialty coffee business, but it was a bit different because it was a joint venture with a company called Tesco, which most people in the UK know of because it's one of the largest supermarket companies in the world. And they wanted to invest in specialty coffee and bring specialty coffee to a wider audience in the UK because they thought it was a way to keep people coming out to their big supermarket estates and to sort of grow a new channel in the business. And so we did that for 3 years. We opened up 50 or so cafes, and again, that was quite interesting because the aim was to how do you grow a specialty coffee business, and how do you make it appealing to a massive audience? So we're talking about consumers here who weren't in central London and used to spending a bit more on a coffee and wanting to try something new. These are people in more regional parts of the UK who whose experience of a good coffee was a very traditional darker roast, maybe some Robusta in it, all the classic styles that many people are aware of. So we had this challenge, and it was quite interesting because we definitely went the wrong way to start with by putting a much more light roast coffee on the menu than what they would be used to, and we had to really evolve the offering. But we knew as well that to grow a specialty coffee business where you're using traditional machines and you're asking a barista to dial in a coffee, to set the machine up in the morning and to keep everything clean and everything and pour latte out on every shot, we knew that we would have to do a lot of training. And so we had a really extensive training program where we would take people with zero skills and they'd be pouring latte out within 4 days. So that was a huge expense for the business, but also a pretty satisfying experience for us because we sort of created this whole training program that started 2 or 3 weeks before you enter a shop. And then they would go into a shop and they'd have a team of baristas on hand to support them in their opening. And then over the course of the next 6 months, they would then develop their skill set even further. So barista training has always been something I've been quite passionate about, and then also managing people and sort of within coffee businesses. So after Harrison Hall in 2015, we focused more on the Taylor Street business, and we set up a roastery for that. And took a lot of the learnings from the Harrison Hall experience, and we're thinking, how do you create a menu of coffees that will appeal to a very broad consumer segment. And I was, again, as you were saying, about roast profiling, like I think an opportunity back then would have been to go a bit darker. But the way we segmented our coffees was to put them into 3 flavor profiles. And so I had these profiles around, which we called classic, golden, and wild. And so the classic profile was sort of more chocolatey, nutty coffees. So it would be like a Brazilian coffee, an El Salvador coffee, generally washed process, and from El Salvador or Guatemala, washed process coffees, more kind of in the chocolatey, maybe very low acidity berries sort of style. And then we had the golden, which was kind of a nice, slightly more fruit forward coffees, but also but not too far from the classic, so a bit of a journey away from more classic coffees. And then we had the wild coffees, which tended to be more funky, so natural process Ethiopians, Kenyan coffees, experimental processing, and so on. And so the idea was that customers could experience coffee in a whole range of flavors, and sort of have the classic if that's what they preferred, but then also like see what a wild coffee would taste like. And so we had a filter coffee station set up. So we had this sort of display cabinet. Hidden behind the label was just an air pot, and so people would dispense themselves a taster of each of the coffees. They could try 3 different, very different profiles, and then they could find the one they want and see if and then take that away. And so what that did for us was it helped us to understand that consumer preferences were about 55-60% in favor of the classic profile. Yeah. And then there were about 15 or so % in favor of the golden. So that middle ground was the least popular. And then the rest of them were moving towards the wild coffee. So there were sort of 2 extremes of like really fruity, quite non-traditional coffees, or more in the sort of traditional classic style. And
it's funny that you have these 2 extremes. We also did this in Kuwait many years ago when I helped Volume 1 starting up. And we had some really light roast and then some really dark roast, and 85% preferred the really dark. And then in the other extreme, 15% preferred the really light, but with not a lot in the middle. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it also, having that display, it also increased our filter coffee sales overall. So as a percentage of total coffee sales, it increased them by about 5, in some cases, 8% in some of the shops. So,
did you have this as a permanent thing every day as part of the products, or it was not just a testing period? Or
no, it was once we tested it in one shop and then we rolled it out with the success at one shop. Yeah,
very, very interesting. So you are integrating consumer kind of data collection with just serving coffee.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's quite a fun, it's sort of a good example of the kind of testing that can be done in a shop.
Yeah, but also this ladder system, right? That you have to have, and it's from industrial design. It's called, there needs to be a balance between novelty and familiarity. So it needs to be familiar enough for people to like it at all, but the novelty makes it interesting. And the novelty is the opportunity to move people over time to something completely different that they didn't like at all in the first place. So that's a perfect kind of ladder system that you had there for this approach.
Yeah, no, it was really fun. And then we had that same sort of menu design across the roasted, the retail menu, or the e-commerce menu as well. So people could choose from a range of subscription coffees, choose by delicate, golden, or wild, and then they would and some people would say just pick for me, and others would be staunchly in the wild category or in the classic category. So yeah. So that was Harrison Hall, then Taylor Street, and then and that focused on education. So we left Taylor Street in 2019, and then since then I've been working with the Simonelli Group on a project called the Coffee Knowledge Hub, and that's all about coffee education. So in-person and digital courses from leading trainers all over the world, and the courses range from different kinds of sensory science, coffee science, to roasting, barista skills. We cover SCA courses. We've got Q courses, looking forward to you joining with your Introduction to Roasting course on the Coffee Knowledge Hub as part of your education offer. And yeah, always looking for more providers as well. So if anyone wants to get in touch about it, get in touch via the Coffee Knowledge Hub Instagram.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because education is how we progress as a community, and so initiatives like that just makes everything easier for everybody. Also, as you said in the beginning, nobody knew what to do, right? So that's really key, and that's also something that we, obviously being an education company, that's something we care a lot about, and we really care about this being done in a proper way to not confuse people but educate people. And that's also, yeah, kind of, now we are pointing in the direction a bit of the podcast, because that's really having a scientific background. Ida and I have been speaking about a lot of things for many years, and at some point I just had to I just had to share it with the world, what we actually specifically were thinking about a lot of things in the specialty coffee education community. So I'm really excited to have you on this, but I'm also very curious about what when you heard the podcast was kind of popping into your mind as something that was, that's useful, that is a good way of saying it, and also I don't agree about that, or this is unclear, or whatever good and bad things that was popping into your head when you heard it. I'm really curious about that. So
yeah, look, I enjoyed it. It brought back my university studies, right? From everything from research methods in psychology to the sciences like biology and chemistry and so on. So yeah, it brought back a lot of good memories, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed as well. I think it's the first in the series. It kind of set the tone for the podcast, where you basically said that if people found the podcast boring, it's not because you're boring, it's because this podcast is not for them. And I really think like that that sums it up beautifully. Like it is
I had to say it.
Yeah. And there are definitely some points where I can see you've got pent up frustration, and it's expressed through your words, sometimes subtly and sometimes less so, but it's good fun. So yeah, no, that was cool. I think where the podcast is interesting is in presenting a very like the theory of science, the theory of research methodologies, and the background, how these things have developed from Plato to Popper and so on. And that's really like everything foundational. You need to have that background in order to understand science, and why we do things the way we do, and also how you can use that information to create something valuable. And I think where you're going now with the series is to say, well, now that people have listened to these first 6 or 7 episodes, now the opportunity is to bring it back to home. So in the different episodes, you give a lot of examples around roasting, and some of the research that's been done, and some of the posts that go out on social media and so on, and the focus of those. But really where we can talk more about today, if you like, is in the application. So I think good science is really a force for good, and if you understand good scientific method, it can benefit businesses, it can benefit baristas, it can benefit all coffee professionals. I think it's also like a social benefit as well. So the I gave the example before of reducing stress for baristas, because if they know what we do know and what we don't know, then it's really powerful stuff. But it can also be really just beneficial for businesses, because it can save them money. If you think about things like, seasoning a group head. So many cafes, the barista will go in and season a group head. So if you've got a 3-group machine, you do that 7 days a week. That's a lot of coffee going down the drain just to put coffee oils into a basket because someone told you need to do that, and that adds up over a year and over many years. What impact does that actually have? Same thing with chemical backflushing. How often do we actually need a chemical backflusher machine? I know some research has just been done by Cafetto, which would be interesting to get the results from. Do group heads need to be flushed before every shot? So as a standard practice, you purge for 1 to 2 seconds each group head. That's adds up to a lot of water, and every water you're getting flushing down the drain has been put through a water filter, and it's taken energy in order to heat it up. And so that machine then has to power up in order to bring the temperature back up to a stable level. So you're using a lot more energy. Do you actually need to do that? And I'm not saying you don't, I'm just saying, do you need to do it?
And this is where I'm in the framework. Yes, theoretically, there is a sensory effect of not flushing, but are you sure it's big enough so that you can taste it? That's the interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Because small causes have small effects. I'm not saying you can't, but at least it would be nice to have some data that suggests if you are removing a difference that's not perceivable, if it's slightly perceivable, or if it's hugely perceivable. You need to answer that question before making an expensive investment in keep flushing, right?
Yeah.
And that's really and this is where everybody in the specialty coffee, it seems like many educators, they want to take a small thing and blow it up to a big thing, and that's costly because then you might miss up that you are doing a lot of things that doesn't even have an effect, but it's costly, right?
Yeah, and it's drilled into us because the Barista Championship rules say you must flush before inserting the handle into the group head, and you must start the button within 1 to 2 seconds of inserting the handle. So there's really no evidence to that, and it's just a form of best practice. And I can see why that was developed, because before these kind of rules were in place, then people were not doing it. And if you don't do it, I mean, over time, presumably, if you're doing it, if you're not flushing for 100 shots or 200 shots or 500 shots or 1,000 shots, you're probably more likely to see an effect. But does it need to happen for every shot? That's the question. But you can keep on asking these questions, So, if you have in terms of roasting, if your desirable drop temp is 220 and you drop it at 223, should you be throwing away that batch? There's things that need to be tested. The packaging that we use is for coffee is really a barrier that's good for storing coffee for 12 months and keeping it safe from all different variables like oxygen and humidity and UV and so on. But how necessary is it for a specialty coffee that's going to be consumed within 2 to 3 weeks? These are all questions to ask, and like we were saying before, when it comes to business decisions, good innovation in businesses can come from asking these questions, having a real problem, and then solving that real problem. So, but to solve a real problem, you've got to identify the problem in the first place. And that's where true innovation comes from, when you solve actual problems.
Yeah, and get a sense of the magnitude of the problem. Is it a small or big problem? This is where people are often a bit blind. So that, for me, one of the biggest time savers is just to get rid of all the things that clearly doesn't even in any circumstances make sense, right? So I'm also really concerned about the waste of time with all the concepts that should be kind of used differently. But I think I've said enough about that in the podcast to not be repeated here. But
then saying that, I think it's worth repeating some of that stuff. I mean, about development time ratios, rate of rise. What is it? Is it necessary to have a ratio when you can just talk in time? And I think you've clearly demonstrated that no, it's not.
Yeah, and the rate of rise is sometimes relevant, and that's the third point: form follows function. That you can use a concept if you specifically have a purpose of using it, but not by default, right? Only when it's necessary. Otherwise, stick to the first principles or the simple kind of things in the system.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's because we are a storytelling community, right? But that doesn't match very well with the educational and science. So we have to really kind of, now I'm in marketing storytelling mode, and now I'm in education mode, right?
Yeah.
People have to have a kind of more binary kind of approach to that.
Yeah, and a good example of that is the specialties, the grading system. So, you know, I'm a Q grader, and did my Q grade back in 2011, 2012. And that was at a time when the methodology for preparing the solution, so there's this, you know, famous solutions test where you have either 2-part or 3-part solutions. And what they were doing in making those solutions is they were diluting them, and they were diluting them. So they would prepare a batch of solution. And then they would make a 2-part solution or a 3-part solution by pouring the solutions together. So you'd end up with the taste modality being below the actual sensory threshold. And
Yeah.
And that happened up until I think about 2014 before they actually realized there's a problem here. So everyone qualifying as a Q grader up until that time was qualifying based on their ability to do the maths and know that there are 12 different solutions, 6 of them are 2-part, 6 of them are 3-part, and then you just try and work it out.
Yeah. And this is where you could wonder why there hasn't been a more kind of intense work with the science behind that protocol. Why can you have such a big organization and not kind of, okay, we need to at least just ask a researcher.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay them a huge research project, but kind of it's
yeah.
But
also, yeah, speaking to marketing, sorry, and the point I was going to make, but got distracted, was around the benefit of the Q score, right? The quality score you put on your bag of coffee. I mean, it often has nothing to do with the coffee that's in the bag, because you put a Q score on an espresso roast of a coffee, and if you were to evaluate that using the SCA cupping score sheet, it would not be scoring the level it's scored, because it's an espresso roast. So you're going to have all these different attributes which you would probably mark down if you were scoring it critically using the score sheet. So what it is, it's really a marketing tool.
Is it because you think because it's roasted for espresso, it's not roasted to Actron 63 or roasted differently? Or
no, it's because you would get, in terms of flavor, you instead of getting, if it was a lighter roast of that coffee, you might get say clearly defined, what you would describe as, say, cherry and apple and chocolate, and a bit of caramel. But then when you roast it for espresso, those notes change, and you're getting more like, you might find them negative flavor attributes. So you might find it more like roast or tobacco or wood or something like that. So you would score it down on flavor, and then you would score it down on aftertaste, and then you would score it down on acidity.
But my point there would be, even if you didn't roast it as espresso but roasted it as it should be in the lab, that number wouldn't make sense, because everybody would score it differently. As I, for example, as the numbers that I found in the freshness handbook, they were all over the place, way below the 80 score threshold for specialty, all the way to, I don't know, remember, the 87 or really high numbers, right? So even if you factor out that it might be roasted as espresso, then that value is not a parameter estimate for anything that really exists in the green beans in the first place, right?
Yeah. So we know that consumers like numbers. We see it in wine, for example. This is a 92-point wine and so on. But actually, I think it is purely a marketing tool in that instance. And that's the value it conveys, because I mean, what that customer is experiencing is they're seeing this coffee as an 85, but they're tasting a dark espresso roast of a coffee that was an 85 when it was scored with a light roast. But the roaster's experience of that coffee in buying it was completely different to the consumer's experience of that coffee. So it's not fulfilling that objective, right? So of conveying what the customer is actually going to experience.
What, as a Q grader, what benefit would you say that the Q system has?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely complicated, and I think we're going to see a move away from. I think we're going to see a move away from scoring coffee in the way the SCA score sheet is doing it, and I think that's being driven by the SCA. I think the Q system is supposed to give a common language to buyers and sellers, so that they can agree on a certain quality, and then using this number system, they can agree a coffee is an 84, and they have to get it within a what is it, 1 mark or 2 marks or something of the agreed score. That's the idea behind it. You can agree on quality, but I think the reality is that it gives the power to the buyer.
Exactly.
As the buyer can say, actually, I got these notes, I don't think it's as good as you're saying, so let's knock 50 cents off the price.
That's my worry.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the issues. Not saying that everyone would use it like that, but it could be. We know it's notoriously difficult for people in different cultures, different backgrounds to agree on coffee, but we also know that people can calibrate on coffee. So if you do cup with someone, so if you do, have a relationship with someone, you taste the coffee and you say, look, these are the attributes of your coffee I like. And that person has also done some kind of cupping training where they can say, so when I say, I like this acidity, I like these kind of flavors that are in your coffee, I like the fact that it's got this, this aromatics or whatever, then that should be communicable to the person you're buying the coffee from. And they should be able to say, when you say that, I know what you're talking about. And then there's a calibration, there's a relationship. And so I think a methodology behind that is really valuable.
I agree. But the problem being, this is, for example, in a company, you could calibrate because you kind of start to understand each other. And if you have a recurrent relationship or have a permanent relationship with green coffee suppliers, you could also calibrate. But the idea about the Q system is that you are calibrated with everybody, right? And this is where it becomes a problem, because I'm not saying that you can't know what somebody else perceives, but you can be, if you've been coffeeing together for years and taking decisions together for years, you'll start to calibrate. But you are not calibrated with somebody else somewhere else who also took the same education 3 years ago, because it goes like this, and then the score doesn't work as a universal score. It only works as more like a consumer number, right? For us as a consumer here in this company, and then but I just want what I think it with the Q grader system or the Q grader education. I think the value is a bit like the competitions, that you learn a lot during the period, but the decisions made at the competitions are a bit random, and also using the method that you learn at the Q grader education also is it gives a lot of or random results in the other end, but you still learn a lot by going through it, because there's a lot of valuable knowledge and there's a lot of skills that you train. So I'm definitely not kind of dismissing it as a great experience that is a great learning, but as the scientist, you're just okay, there's a number, what's the variation? What is the background phenomenon that we are trying to expose? And then all, it's that part of it that I think is problematic. And then the power point of, if you as a buyer, it's only a 78, so I'll give you this, and then magically it gained 3 points when the marketing department and I'm saying the same as you. I'm sure this doesn't happen every time, but if it's possible to do it, it will happen to some extent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is, then I think it's a negative power tool in those cases.
Yeah. 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 No, it's really interesting. Where yeah, I think with any scoring methodology, there are always pros and cons behind them. But I think, again, you've got to look at it, you know, what is the outcome? What is the objective here?
And this is where I think consumer science is very, very well established. So let's just do that instead. Let's not imagine that there are universal quality concepts out there, and just always make them specific for a specific group of people, just as the audience as a roaster. That is a specific group of people. So like you did in your cafes, that was your consumers, right? Why don't you want to get, and you did, numbers about their preferences? And then it's completely scientific. There's no, because you're only saying something about preferences about a specific group of people who, and it's objective, because everybody doing the same would get the same result with the same group of people.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the solution. Just do what consumer science does, and then you are kind of out of that problem.
Yeah. And it's where you know, where social media is, you know, a force for good, but not for not so much good as well. Where ideas are generated through social media posts, but you know, what works in one market doesn't necessarily work in another market, and also quite often they're based around someone's personal preference. And the you know, they say that I did X and Y and I achieved this result, which was great for me. It's the best coffee I've ever had. But they never talk about what the coffee was or why it was such a good coffee. They just talk about, you know, I had an amazing coffee experience. All you have to do is tweak X and Y and you'll have the same experience. But there are so many variables which would influence whether that experience was good or not. Sometimes it's this, you know, bias of I've experimented, I've concentrated on it, I've gone through the process, I've done the work there, and I think I've achieved these results. But actually, you just conjure yourself into believing that what you're doing is achieving it, when it's actually any number of other variables. So
and that's a really, so when is it free? And this is for example, if you have an amazing quality of coffee and you create a roast profile, then you can brag about the roast profile, but really it was the coffee, right? So that's an example of because sometimes when people have really, really good coffees in a roastery, it's now I'm a bit kind of the devil's advocate here. It's not necessarily because they are good roasters that they have great coffee. It's just because they buy great coffee. And however, and it's because when I consult, sometimes I'm appearing when the cheap green coffee has already been purchased, right? And then whatever I do, it always tastes like boring cardboard.
And they wave your wand.
Exactly. Yeah. So no, we buy cheap coffee and we get an expensive consultant, and then they hope that I can, and that's really tough. Or sometimes I consult, and then they have great coffee, and whatever I do, it tastes amazing in different ways, right? So this is an example of, it's not always the skills as a barista or as a roaster, but then it would be a strategic skill if you understand that I have to get good coffee. Then it's not a coincidence, right? But
and that's the challenge. It's buying great coffee for your business, for your customers. That's
if you need great coffee for your customers.
Exactly. Sure.
because you wouldn't
Yeah.
get a cup of excellence coffee for somebody who would add a lot of syrup and milk anyway, right?
Yeah.
So in your ladder, you need to get cheaper coffee for people who add milk anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the price would also be too high, right? So that's always the form follows function. You need to make sure who are you trying to please and why, and then you might have to sometimes buy cheap coffee because it wouldn't make sense to. So that's why it's so important to have an objective, right? And know who your objective is tied to.
Yeah, I always remember. I think at the first probably 4 years that we had Taylor Street, I was convinced that we were popular and people only came to us for the coffee. It took me a long time to realize, no, people are coming here for the whole experience.
Yeah.
It's really not just the coffee. They love the baristas, they love the music, they love the atmosphere that's in this cafe. And so quite
I
often,
hope I'll not become sued by saying this, but there's a lot of people at Starbucks, right?
Yeah, no, there are. Yeah, it's incredible.
It might be all the other things than the coffee.
Yeah. I think it's called sugar. Yeah, but I mean, on the social media thing, I remember a few years ago there was this whole movement towards 6-bar espresso. So there was a very convincing, well argued, very eloquent series of 2 or 3 blog posts about the experience of moving your pump pressure down from 9-bar, which is traditional, down to 6-bar. And then the claim was that you had a lot less channeling and therefore the coffee tasted better. That was one of the claims anyway. But when you think about that objectively, you think, well, how have you tested that? How have you tested what channeling is, what impact it's having on the flavor? How have you done that with both the 9-bar coffee and the 6-bar coffee, so that you can make the claim that reducing channeling in a 6-bar coffee is giving you a better one? Because we played around with this a lot in the cafes, and the really clear conclusion was that going down to 6-bar reduces the TDS of the coffee. So you would go from quite a strong espresso to a much lighter bodied espresso, like lower strength espresso. So, which is not really achieving an outcome that most customers want. They want more body and strength, especially when you then put 10 ounces of milk on it. So it's just a great example of following a trend, which was really good fun to explore, not a great outcome for your customers, and not really applicable to a local market.
But it's a fun idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it should be tested. But sometimes these fun ideas are just traveling too far before they are tested, and kind of if we are right in the research that we are putting out soon, it's still for publication on the whole organic acid thing. It just doesn't make sense at all to test people. And that's what they do in the Q program as well. Malic, citric, lactic, glycolic, and all these.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to do it from a coffee perspective, and it doesn't seem like it makes sense to do it from a sensory perspective either. But it's an amazing story. And it seems like it's been done for 20 years now because it's a great story, but nobody really tested it.
Yeah.
So and that's a good idea. It's like similar what you said with the channeling. It's a great story, so people apply it, because it's a great story, and nobody thinks, does it make sense? Could it be done? So that it happens a bit too often, and this is where I'm really excited about science becoming more a part of what we do. So the initiatives that you are making, and also I had Samu on the previous episode. Scientific critical thinking shouldn't be so critical that we take out the excitement for baristas and roasters to say and do anything, because they'll just always tell us that it's wrong, right? That's not the point. We are kind of constructively critical, so that once we are done with the kind of devil's advocate, we are at a higher level with the solutions, and not kind of done with experimenting or done with collaborating with baristas and roasters. So
no, I think and I think also what you're getting at here is the fundamental what you're teaching in your podcast series is some of the fundamental skills of evaluating the things that we're reading, right? So, and this is where good science is a force for social good. Looking at your sources of information, critically assessing whether they're preferential or objective, whether they're based in good reasoning, good science, good foundations, or whether it's something that you can actually evaluate. And this gets into more social sciences as well, but good research methods help you understand whether your source of information is accurate or inaccurate, whether it's with maybe a stretch beyond this podcast, but we're seeing a lot of propaganda being produced coming out of Russia, but also equally going back towards Russia with regards to the Russian government's invasion of Ukraine. And people need to be better at evaluating whether something has merit or it doesn't. And so some of the research, some of the theories and concepts you're talking about in this podcast relate strongly to that ability, and it's a core skill. And so as an educator, you want people to apply what they're learning from a course, like from the series of podcasts, and what they're learning in your classes. You want them to be able to apply it to the rest of their lives. So, good science is applicable to cooking as much as it is to, to choosing which accounts you follow on Twitter or Instagram and so on.
Yeah, and this is interesting because in science you always have some kind of empirical you cannot just say things, right? Mm-hmm. There's a kind of a empirical things you want to expose. How does nature actually work? Or even in social science, you want to describe something that exists, right? And this is, as I spoke with Samuel about this on the previous podcast, in organic chemistry, there's a long tradition of exposing a world that we can't see, the organic molecules, and you can't see it, but there are so many good observations where you can infer a world that's there with models of molecules and stuff like that. But you have to really commit yourself to only confine your thinking and to things that make sense in the light of the evidence that you see. And this is having gone through this in an education, done a lot of experiments. As a biologist, I've had a lot of I had physical chemistry. That's basically a lot of that is the ideal gas law in so many different situations where you had to kind of hold something constant and then do something else. So understand the ideal gas law from 80 different angles. And once you've done that, you understand it, right? And then organic chemistry, then you get all the small sugars and all the amino acids and all the really small things, and you do go into the lab and you understand there's a really empirical correlate to this. And the experience as a researcher with this, where you will only say something and you really want to know what's true outside you. There's something outside you that you want to your true idea of truth needs to be tied directly to some evidence. Mm-hmm. And this is where sometimes, for example, now that you're talking about what's going on in Ukraine, that sometimes then you read the media here in the West, and you get a one story, and then you see the Russian story, and they are exactly opposite. It's just like listening to my two boys when they are in a fight. Yeah. It's always he did this, he did that, he did this. It's so my solution is to spend time with the boys. Mm-hmm. So I saw what happened before, what happened under, and what happened after. So there's an empirical aspect of understanding. Okay, I have two different sides, but the empirical is the observations that I have. And this is sometimes when you see the media, I just feel I really want to speak with somebody who lives there, right? I don't know anybody in Russia. I don't know anybody in Ukraine. I would really like to know somebody who's been living there the last 15 years, mm-hmm. and speaking with a lot of people, because I have no idea what is the empirical correlate between what I see in the media, right?
Yeah.
So it's the empirical, what was, because there is lies, right? But there's also something that's true. And as a scientist, you're really committed to not just fantasize about wonder. I can just say something about the organic world and then I can convince people, no, there's something outside me that's true.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to kind of not just believe something, but be committed to an empirical thing, to that you will, if the empirical outcome shows you something different than you hoped, you'll adjust
Yeah.
and not just come up with another lie to make your own version correct. And this is also what I, as an educator, there's a lot of, for example, the whole channeling thing you said, it would be a great story if that was true, right? But
Yeah.
wonder if it's true or not.
Yeah.
And this is
Exactly.
what you need to be curious about yourself. The person saying it needs to be curious about whether it's true or not. If they are not, and this is where I'm also saying in my podcast, people are unscrupulous to get attention. Sometimes it's more important for people to just get in television and say something than saying something that's true.
Yeah.
And that's really a waste of time for everybody in the community.
Yeah. And actually, maybe another episode of your podcast, you talked about sort of multidisciplinary research where certain scientists may not respect other scientists. I think you used an example
Yeah,
of chemists not necessarily understanding sensory science, but
another model
equally,
of the kindergarten situation.
but equally, if you want to understand what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and actually get evidence from the ground, there's plenty of social scientists who have done that kind of work, who are using available data from polling and from survey data, which they're able to extrapolate some good results. It's a science. It's a science in a different form. So
Yes.
good to get a social scientist on and understand the world from their perspective.
Yeah, because here the methodology is as I also say in the podcast, right? What makes the data objective? Because psychology and social, oh, that's so subjective. That's so no. It's first person data, and if collected correctly, they are as scientific as any other data, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about using the right methodology so that you can get unbiased data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So, Andrew, is there anything else that popped out in your mind when listening to the podcast that you'd like to either challenge or say this is useful for this or the other reasons, or should I progress to some of the other questions that I have?
I think no, I think we've covered a lot. I think really the opportunity has been to apply the theory to real world examples, and your focus on roasting, and it can also be applied to all other areas of the coffee industry, and it's been really fun to discuss that. So yeah, let's move on to your other questions.
Okay, now that you are so experienced and knowledgeable of education, I just want to ask you, where do you see education is going, and very broadly, if there's something that some trends you see?
Yeah, I've got some opinions on that. It's my day to day. So the education in coffee has been, again, it's been, I think a lot of things in coffee come from people's enthusiasm, their passion for the coffee, and sometimes sometimes we're a bit insular in the coffee industry, and we don't respect the expertise of other professionals who have been doing this for a long time, just in other fields. And coffee is one of those things, and we see education is it's a long-standing profession. There's loads and loads of research. There are academics all over the world who specialize in educational methods, in the best ways to effectively teach people, and from materials to theories of learning and development. And when you look at changing job roles, you also see that there's a development in the number of companies employing people who are learning and development managers. So they're not the people training, they're not the people with the content knowledge, they're the people who understand the how to train people, or the theory of education. So the people who will train the trainers to deliver courses that are effective in communicating the knowledge and delivering the skills that people need. So I think specifically for coffee education, we need to be looking more broadly at what are the effective ways to train. And then, as with many things in coffee, we're very good at taking on technology, and technology is a way to leapfrog. So we're coming from behind. So moving away from people who are passionate about training and have knowledge, and helping them to develop their abilities as trainers using technology. And that means using digital, where digital is more effective than classroom-based learning, or it could be using a hybrid of both digital and in-person training. So I think many companies have invested in learning management systems, which is an administrative tool for managing content, organizing content in a sort of database, but then also for facilitating the delivery of that content, and then finally for assessing the effectiveness of it. So you can see how people move through a course. You can get anonymous survey results from using the system. So it's these are all tools that are at our disposal now to improve the quality of our education. But it also makes education a lot more accessible. So an in-person course costs a lot of money because you've got a trainer, you've got a limited number of people, you've got a building, you've got equipment on site. These are all expensive things to have to deliver a course. So it's rightly more expensive to do a small class training. But when you have a digital format, your audience becomes the world in some cases, and you can afford to deliver that content much more easily. And that means that there are more people with more access to education who can, may use whatever course, even if it's just foundational, as a stepping stone to finding out more and to finding work, and also to getting into an industry. So I think the future of coffee education is very exciting, and I think we're seeing that in a massive way. Out of every disaster, often there's some really nice things that come out of it. But and one of those is this initiative put on by Emma Haynes called the Global Coffee Calibration, and she is using she's made it as of Friday last week. She came up with an idea. Friday last week was the 28th of February, for anyone who's watching this podcast at a later date. But so the invasion in Ukraine was very fresh, and Emma was wondering how she can help and how the coffee community can help. So she's come up with this concept called the Global Coffee Calibration. And she built a website over the weekend, and she's made a call. She's put a campaign together calling coffee trainers from all over the world to donate 1 hour of their time. And that so it's an hour of their time to deliver a course. And that course can be online or it can be in person. It's completely up to the trainer. And the idea is that anyone who wants to attend the class has to pay £10. That £10 then goes to SCA Ukraine for dissemination across the coffee community in the Ukraine. So, the courses themselves are all going to be delivered on the 29th of April, and it's going to be delivered across any platform that people choose to use. So in our case, we'll use the Coffee Knowledge Hub, and we'll have both digital events, and then I'm also going to do a local one in Geneva, where I'm based now. But I put a call out to some people in Australia who will deliver events in person and also online, and in the US. So Alex Pond from Cafe Excellence is getting involved. Andre Ironman at the Victoria Arduino Lab in Melbourne's getting involved. So a really amazing initiative. And I think it's going to be a great way both to spread knowledge across the world, but also raise money. And it sort of shows how education is powerful and beneficial for people, but also it's a really good indication of where education is going.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to all of what you said. The first thing with there are people who already know how good education is structured, and we are just coffee geeks, and I can relate exactly to this process. Just starting to teach coffee roasting, and then when I got involved with the SCA and the foundation, intermediate and professional, I had to, what do you need to know and be able to do? That was really interesting to be kind of, I had to fill in as a structure because somebody else kind of told me that that's a good structure. And right now I'm also thinking that's for sure also what we need to do. And again, as you said, with the new opportunities of online, you need to be more structured, which I think is a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really starting to get more curious about how is good education structured rather than how do I explain coffee roasting, right?
Yeah.
And recently I came up with a actually based on my podcast. I think good coffee roasting education has three phases. The first is control. The next one is diversity, and the last one is the consumer link, so that you kind of split up your. So the first with control, that's the roast profile design basic principles that the e-learning course that I'll soon have on your platform as well, where basically that's like you learn how to drive the car in a small confined space. Just that when people start to drive, they have to be on what a slippery road and make breaks and take sharp turns. It's not a real road, right? It's just a boring place. And that's always what I do as the first thing. I don't care about how it tastes like. It's just you need to be able to show that you can control the roaster. So that's learning how to drive, how to control the car. Next thing, you get a map, and then you are driving everywhere in the map. So that's this diversity thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third step, that's the consumer. Then only then you get the destination. So here you have control, then you have diversity, and lastly you have a destination. But that's after having been through the first things.
Yeah.
So, and this is where I think that most principles and education in coffee roasting, it's a mix of everything. They have some technical recommendations that is actually an implied place where you need to be. But who says you need to be there? For example, the development time ratio. Well, who are you roasting for? I mean, it doesn't help you create something for different people, right? Because it's implied that there's only one right way. And are we learning how to roast, or how are we learning? Where are we in this? And also the constantly declining rate of rise thing. Well, is that control? It sounds like control, and the consequences that people are fiddling around with the gas all the time, which means that they're never really learning how to control the roaster because they don't know what they are doing. They are just like, it's on autopilot, right? Because you're just following the curve. So splitting it up to control, diversity, and then destination. I think, but then I thought this is so clear. Somebody else I can't have been coming up with this. Somebody else might have thought, and I thought I have to be more interested in all the deep plates that everybody else has invented already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your point, right? That there are people who already know how it's well structured, and it's a stupid thing to not seek that out and just hope for you to stumble upon these things along the way yourself.
Yeah, and what you're talking about there is two things. One, there's education. There's theory of education, didactics, and so on. But there's also mastery. So it's how you pick up a skill and then you become a master at that skill. And it's so they're two slightly divergent things. But if you start Googling mastery, there's some fascinating both research and also some great books. There's a book by a guy called Josh Waitzkin called The Art of Learning. And it's it's fantastic, really inspiring. He was a chess prodigy, and there was actually a film made about him, Searching for Bobby Fischer, which was about his life. But he was one of those sort of kid chess prodigies, and he starts by evaluating how he came to master chess. And then he fell out of love with chess when he was 13 or so, and took up a new hobby, which was something called Tai Chi push hands, which is like a martial form of Tai Chi. And he then became a world champion at that. And so he talks about his methodology for becoming a world champion at that. So he's sort of gone from zero skills to world master in two very different disciplines before he was 20 years old. So quite precocious, but very impressive. And he and the book is about mastery. It's really well written. He's now a consultant and spends a lot of his time relaxing in Costa Rica, I think, by the looks of things on social media. So yeah.
Mastery of relaxation.
Yeah.
Great. And the last question is, based on your personal experience, what do you think is difficult about working with scientists and science projects? Have you had any kind of things that you realize this is kind of specifically annoying or difficult?
Yeah, it's another thing you talk about in the podcast. It's extrapolating beyond. So scientific experiments, and scientists are rightly so, they're very focused on the experimental question at hand, and you sometimes get creative and you want to go beyond that. And so, you want to say, because I remove channeling, this is now a god shot, when it doesn't necessarily apply. But yeah, I think that's always the hardest thing, is knowing what are the boundaries for an experiment, and going beyond that. And I gave you an example where I was, I'm really keen to get a massive online experiment going, and working with you on that. And I've been, I think, pitching this idea for a while. But I gave you a concept of, why don't we test whether rinsing filter papers is like, where it's necessary, where it's not, what impact is it actually having? And so I proposed what I thought was a very simple design for that. And you said, nice idea, keen to do something, but this is way too complicated.
No, but I think it was a great idea. It was just because we were talking about teaching people about science, and then I was a bit worried about teaching people about science while doing science. I thought that was, the scope was too big. I think it was a great idea, and I would love to participate. But then it has to be just a research project and not also an educational.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's again, I've just gone beyond the this is where, to your question before, is what's difficult about working with science. It's about keeping within the boundaries.
Yeah, and also, and that's also what I talked with Samo about in the previous episode, that often it's very, very important in science that you stick with one question and one question only. Because if you don't have one question, you can structure everything else according, and this is where you can get confusion down the line. So that follows the form follows function, right? Yeah. That you have to structure everything you do. Everything you do needs to be structured around one question, because otherwise you'll never really get an answer to one question. And if you don't, then you don't have any answers at all, right? Yeah. So that's kind of by so many years doing projects where we kind of ended up with non-conclusive, but just, looking back, we could have predicted that, because we were sitting between three chairs, and doing so, our answer will also be between three chairs, right? So having the kind of the discipline of making sure there's one and only one research question, and then we build up the research design based on that. That's kind of and Samu also kind of recognized that pain.
Yeah.
Great.
The pain and the fun, though, because then at least you know that when you answer that question, you've answered it, or you've
exactly.
Yeah. So
And it might be a very narrow answer, because the answer tends to be as narrow as the question. But that's great, because then you can ask one more question and get another answer, right?
Yeah.
And that's also with my research I've done with coffee roasting. Some people would say that, yeah, but it's very narrow. Are you sure it works also on low density beans? No, I'm not sure, because we haven't tested it yet. But if I didn't confine to a very simple model, we would still not have any research, right? So I had to kind of make it simple. Otherwise, it wasn't a sure first kind of ground for coming research. And then it's up to coming research to answer all those questions. So it's a strength that you are very narrow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I think, Andrew, your wife might think that you have exceeded your allotted time. So it was a great pleasure to have a more concentrated kind of focus with you here, and also hearing more about your background that I actually have heard before. So that was a personal great thing to understand more specifically your background. And I'm really looking forward to work and talk with you much more in the future. So and I really want to thank you for taking your time to comment on the podcast, but also to share your perspective of education with our audience. So thank you so much for taking out the time to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. It was really an honor to be on the podcast and get to spend some time talking to you and sharing some thoughts. So hopefully people listening enjoy it and
Great.
learn.
Definitely.
Okay. And
Great.
obviously get in touch with me on the Coffee Knowledge Hub or my personal Instagram, or we can share an email if people are interested. So
yeah, that was my final question. So if people wanted to hang out with you, do you have any physical events that you will also be available at? So
yeah,
Boston or World of Coffee, or
yes, I'm definitely a World of Coffee. And I won't be in Boston, but I'll be at London Coffee Festival for a few days, then World of Coffee. And then we're putting on some courses at the headquarters for Simonelli Group, which is down in the middle of Italy, a beautiful part of the world if you want to make the trek. And then I'm based in Geneva, and on the 29th of April, I'm going to do a mini roasting demonstration to highlight differences of on flavor profiles for roast, more kind of consumer focused. So probably not your audience, but I'll be there and I'm happy to chat. That's at My Little Cup in Geneva, which is in Secheron, if anyone is based out this way.
Okay, amazing. What about the Danish Coffee Festival in the end of April?
It's clashing with the global coffee calibration.
Great. And otherwise, Simonelli Knowledge Hub, your work is all over the place there. So I'll highly recommend people to visit that if you haven't already.
Yeah, please do. That'd be great. Any feedback? If you have any questions about the courses, or you want to add some courses, if you're a trainer out there listening and you want to add some content, we're always looking for good trainers, and yeah, so please get in touch.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I'll invite you on another podcast later when we have something new to talk about. So thank you so much for today.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.